This Choircast podcast episode is brought to you by religious refugees deconstructing towards spiritual and emotional healing. Have you been questioning your faith and spiritual beliefs while leaving the familiarity of your religious homeland? Have you experienced loneliness, isolation, and fear of rejection from religious others just because you are a more inclusive, creative, and expansive person? Join the legion of others on the road to healing and self-discovery, and let Dr. Mark Karris's book, Religious Refugees, be your guide.
Well, welcome everyone to another episode of I Was a Teenage Fundamentalist. Troy, what's going on for you?
What's going on for me? Lots going on for me, I guess. I just got back from sunny Queensland, where it wasn't all that sunny, to be honest. I had to go up there for work. I was doing some accessibility work with a large insurance company up there. And that was fun. I got to see my family and spend some time with my dad, and it was good. Good time.
Are they more accessible now?
They will be. They will be. Give them some time. But this was just first steps.
Nice. Oh, that sounds good. And yes, my oldest daughter lives in Queensland. She's been saying it's just been rainy and cloudy and not very sunshine state-ish.
Yeah, and even foggy. It was even foggy when I was up there, which is not a usual Brisbane thing at all.
Oh, the world's upside down. It's crazy. Anyway, today we are going to have a chat, and it's one of those days of an Our Story. And the Our Story today is your story, and it's your story of how you lost your faith.
It is how it finally came crashing down, Brian, how it finally came to the point where I said, I am not a Christian and I do not believe. And we kind of got a little bit ahead of ourselves where we told the aftermath story, I think in our last Our Story episode, but we hadn't actually told my devastation, scorched earth, come to the end of my faith story. So yeah, a little bit backwards in that one, but that's okay. I remember in our first episode, or maybe it was our second, we said these stories are not necessarily going to be consecutive, and yet then we did.
We did. But now we're going to go back because this isn't consecutive.
That's right. Now we're being true to what we said 4 years ago, which was these stories are not always going to be consecutive, but they're going to be episodic, we said.
Yes, and sometimes psychotic, potentially. But I'm looking forward to today's conversation because I'm sure there's quite a few things in there that I don't know the detail of, because this is something that happened when we weren't hanging out, and I would assume that this even happened in another country.
It did. It did happen in another country. Before I go there, I just want to say that you have accidentally shaved your beard off, right? You told me that, and so I'd like you to share how one accidentally shaves one's beard. But the thing that struck me is you remind me of when Pastor Jim McMillan shaved his beard off, and it was just so shocking. He was just so different, and it was like, yeah. So I'm going to call you Pastor Jim for the rest of this session, if that's all right with you. And then I want you to sell my motorbike.
I would rather you didn't. But yes, accidentally what happened was I got a new beard trimmer because I do like to keep my beard nicely trimmed. That's not a euphemism. And I had it on a setting which I thought was the setting I would usually use on my other trimmer. And it happens that I gave myself a bit of a stripe, almost right down to the skin. So and then I can't walk around with that. So I had to trim the whole thing off to right down to not even stubble. Like it's hardly even noticeable. And it feels weird. And every time I look in the mirror at the moment, it gives me a little bit of a shock as well. So yes, it will grow back. It grows back pretty quick, but I'll be fine. You might be a bit shaken this episode though, because I was
because remember when you joined the call, I said to you, "Did you have a big night? Because you don't look right." So obviously the beard makes you look healthier or something, you know.
Yeah. Well, maybe I just look a bit pasty without it because that bit of my face hasn't seen sun for a little while and it's not as tanned. I think that's the theory I'm going with anyway. It's
Yeah, it
probably
hasn't
wrong.
seen sun, and Brian, it hasn't seen the sun,
No.
right? Meaning of God. It's been a long time since you've basked in his glory.
It has been, and I probably never will again. And I'm saying probably because, you can never be too certain. I could get reconverted. Who knows?
That reminds me of that song. Did you ever know that one? What, never thirst again? No, never thirst again. What, never thirst again? And then the women sing, no, never thirst again. And whoso drinketh Jesus said, shall never, never thirst again.
No, I
I think that was a
don't know.
revival centre hit.
Okay. So all you revivalists out there, you may be familiar with that, but no, I wasn't. I remember lots of those choruses though, where the men would have their part, the women would have their part, and gee, you just felt like you were so much more spiritual when you did those bits, didn't you?
Oh, totally. Do you know what's been stuck in my head lately though? And it's an earworm, and forgive me for those of you that do know this because it's probably going to stick with you. And it's the one that it's beginning to rain. Did you know that one? It's
Is that the one with the little clap?
rain, hear the voice of my Father.
Yep.
Saying, whosoever thirst, come and drink of this water. Yeah, that's been stuck in my head. If you're thirsty and dry, lift your hands to the sky. It's beginning to rain. But you know the thing about that one? It's if you're thirsty and dry, lift your heads to the sky or lift your hands to the sky. But in the revival centre, we didn't do that. But we'd sing the song. But
how did you deal with that? If you,
I think we sang "Lift Your Heads to the Sky." It's beginning to rain.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense.
Because if it had said "Lift your hands to the sky," I don't think we would have sang it.
Yeah, was it really frowned upon to lift your hands in the revival?
It was not frowned upon if you did it, right? Let's say you were visiting from another, denomination, and you thought, oh, this is just a normal Pentecostal church, and you came and raised your hands. They'd come and tap you on the shoulder and say, "We don't do that here. Put your hands down."
What was behind that? I can't remember.
I don't know. I think it was just another way of them differentiating themselves. I think Lloyd thought it was extravagance and indulgence. He used to say, it's indulgence. That's what it is. It's indulgence. But I think it was just another way to differentiate the revival centres from the backslidden, lukewarm, spew out of your mouth churches, as we used to refer to them.
So let me get this straight. The man that lived in a mansion in Hawthorne thought lifting your hands was extravagance, but his mansion wasn't.
And drove a Jag.
Yeah.
Yeah, late model Jag at the time.
Yeah, there's no cognitive dissonance there at all. Anyway,
we got distracted, didn't we? I feel like we're in Bart Ehrman's podcast, where he tells you about his week, and you just sit there going, "Oh, for God's sake, hit that 30-second button! Come on, get to the content." So sorry, people. I hope you've skipped past your 30 seconds or whatever.
We did do a bit of a Bart as well because they quite often get stuck on what the weather is like and how it's different weather in the States as to the UK.
England. Yeah. He wants to
so
live in England, doesn't he?
He does. And he would be suited there, sitting out the front of Oxford in a rocking chair with a pipe.
With a pipe, yeah. That's probably true because you notice he's got like classical music. He's got British co-hosts, British voiceovers. Dude wants to be in England.
Totally. Anyway, we're distracted again. We're hopeless. Here we are 8 minutes in and people are probably going, when are they going to fucking talk about Troy deconverting?
We are, right? We're talking about Bart Ehrman. We're talking about Jim McMillan's beard. We're talking about it's beginning to rain. Hear the voice of my Father saying whoso... Oh, sorry.
I feel like we've now had 3 fast songs. We need to move into the slow songs now.
Yeah, well, as long as we don't talk about progressive religions, people will stay with us, right?
This is very true. Yes, we will have another series on progressive religions.
Yeah. Today we're going to talk about progressive Hinduism.
Well, fortunately, people, I had 2 people lined up to talk about progressive Hinduism. Both of them were super keen, really engaged. Yeah, we're going to record. One of them cancelled 3 times and the other one just went completely cold on us, as did their media people. And it was their media people that reached out and went, yeah, so-and-so would love to do this. So anyway, fortunately for you people, you don't have to hear about progressive Hinduism. And as we know, the theme is they all end up believing pretty much the same thing. They all become universalists. Everyone wins. The end.
Yeah, wrapped in a bow, tied nice and neat. There it is. Everything's great. Moving on. You don't need religion. Come back to the podcast.
And come back to hear about. And he is a sort of a. It's not a. I don't know. Today's not a trauma story.
No, not trauma at all. This is liberation, man. This is burn your bra. This is it.
Yeah. I'm going to burn my bra.
You should. No, don't burn your bra. You still need it.
Yeah, this is true. Actually, the old over the shoulder boulder holder. All right. Where do we start? Where are we situated when this is happening?
Well, I thought I'd pick up from when I was in Queensland, right? So we'd left Singapore. Renee and I had left Singapore. We'd come back to Queensland. We got married. In my Singapore episode, I talked about how I had connected with Uniting Church minister who had introduced me to Marcus Borg and started telling me about, that substitutional atonement was not the true message and all this kind of stuff. And he sent me along to a liberal Catholic church and all that had sort of happened. And Renee and I were living in Brisbane. And I guess what sort of happened, Brian, was, well, not sort of happened, but Renee had some mental health issues that needed to be dealt with that we didn't know how to deal with. And so she was really quite miserable being in Queensland. And I don't think it was so much about Queensland, but I sort of interpreted it as that at the time. I went, she's obviously not coping with being away from home and all this. And I told you I had parked a lot of my religious stuff. And then when I came back to Australia, I sort of unpacked it and I got quite overwhelmed by it, to be honest. And so I sort of tried to park it a little bit again. But there was no therapy. There was nowhere to go and get support and help. And so Renee was kind of falling apart and I wasn't doing so great. And so by this stage, I was working for a educational publisher. I was working as a salesperson, going out to schools and selling books and computer programs and all this kind of stuff that, people sell into schools all the time. And I was doing okay, and I had a work car and a petrol card, and it was a pretty good life. And we were living in a inner city suburb in Brisbane, and yet there was just no happiness.
You had that God-shaped hole.
I had the God-shaped hole. Yeah, I did. I did have the God-shaped hole. No, I didn't. But I had this big fucking hole in my psyche that was left there by God, left there by the church, where the train had barrowed through my life. But lucky I'm not bitter. But anyway, I started to look for work back in Asia. I thought, this is fucked. I don't like living in Australia, and I wasn't connecting with the people. It was funny because I realized how pretentious it was. Like I'd meet people and I'd just start telling them stories about living in Asia and the things I got up to. And it just sounded really pretentious. Like, hi, I'm Troy and let me tell you about all the time I lived in Asia. But these were actually my stories. And this was actually what was front of mind. These are the things that had just happened to me. And I don't know if you remember that joke about the guy that says, I hate it when, people always talk about living overseas and how exciting it was when they lived overseas and all the great things that happened. I had a friend of mine that was just like that. It was a housemate, and that was when I lived in Paris and we shared a house. But it was kind of like that. But it wasn't intentional that I was trying to be pretentious. It just came naturally. No, that's who I was, and these were my stories. And I found that I wasn't connecting with these people. I'd go to pubs and hang out and meet people in pubs or go to places, and they just hadn't lived abroad. They'd only ever lived in whatever city that they had grown up in, maybe one or two within Australia, and I just wasn't connecting. And I think the excitement of living overseas and the daily adventure of walking out the front door of your house into some Asian country where you just didn't know what the fuck was going to happen. I think I missed that a lot. And so I started to look for work back in Asia, and my mum was really disappointed because she really wanted me to come home and, be done with all this silly wandering bullshit. And I found a job, basically. Found a job. And the job was advertised saying that they were starting schools in China and that they were looking for teachers. And I had never lived in China. I'd been there, but I'd never lived there. And I thought, okay, cool. So I got on to the number it was in the paper. That's how old it was, right? That's how long ago it was, right? It was in the paper. And I rang them and they seemed to be quite good. And they said they had a school here in Australia and they were looking to expand over into China. And it seemed like a really good opportunity, not just to be a teacher, but actually get in the ground level of this expansion and sort of grow with it. I was coming to that age where I was thinking about career and things like that. And so I accepted this job, and it was in Quanzhou, Fujian, China. So Fujian, for those of you that know, is Hokkien, where they make the noodles, where the noodles come from, those yellow Hokkien noodles. And so, took this position and went to China. And so this was the as I said before, the first time I'd lived in China. It ended up being 7 years that I did live in China.
And let's not just brush over that it was 7 years, Troy. That's a holy number.
It is a holy. That's right.
7 years that you were there. I mean, I don't think this is a coincidence.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there was some. I think there was some holy growth, and it was a time of blessing and prosperity. It was a time of growth. Yeah. So anyway, 7 years. Yeah. So I don't know what happened then. I guess we arrived and it was a country town, right? And Mrs. Waller had come from a huge city, and you don't when you're from Melbourne, you don't go and live in Ballarat. Do you know what I mean? Or when you're from Sydney, you don't go and live in Wollongong. I know some people do, but most people don't, right? It's kind of like seen as a bit of a step backwards unless it's some sort of sea change or something.
I would like to call out it's Joe. I know Joe has moved from Bayside, Melbourne to Ballarat recently, and you'll be listening. And I think, Troy, that she's a prime example of someone who is sophisticated and moves from Bayside, Melbourne to Ballarat. But yes, point.
No, you're right in a lot of ways, because there's a lot of those, not in every way though, but there's a lot of those ex-South Melbourne, inner city Church of Christ people that are all up in the bush now. Like that's a thing. This is what a lot of those lefties do. They all head up there, right? And cool, bless. But that wasn't Renee. She was like, no, this is not what I'm going to do. So she wasn't very happy. But anyway, we were living in China and traveling around and going to Beijing. And I remember seeing Tiananmen Square for the first time and going, it looks bigger on telly. That's actually what I thought.
When you say country town, though, I assume that this country town probably had 5 million people in it. 7
million people. Yeah.
Yeah, well, there you go. But yes, in Chinese standards, country town, yes.
But it is still a country town because it's just full of Chinese bogans and hicks. And the word is nongmin. Nongmin means peasant. And it was pretty full on, man. Like they would do things like they would hold up ropes. The cops would hold up ropes to stop people from crossing the road, like literally, like animals. They would pull up, and I'm not saying the Chinese are animals. I'm saying they treated them like animals. They would pick up these ropes and pull them so that people couldn't cross the road. And then when when it was on red, and then when it go green, they'd drop the ropes, and then all the people could cross the road. They just were doing their best to control people, to sort of civilize them in terms of, waiting for crosswalks and things like that.
Were boom gates over there just people that put PVC poles on their arms, and when the trains came past, they just extended their arms down? Like, was it like that as well?
I wouldn't have been surprised, because they tried to give people jobs. When you pull into a car park and you push the little button, this is a paid car park, and you push the little button and it puts the ticket out for you and you drive through. They would actually have people standing there who would push the button for you and hand you the ticket. Which you could do yourself.
Like the old elevator monitors. People would be in there to push the button on the elevator. And that was at Myers in Melbourne, yes, creating work until things became more automated.
Well, I mean, it's already automated. They just did it anyway because they were trying to create work. Anyway, we digress. So, which is not us today, is it? I should have had a list of things to look at because I'm just going off. But anyway, here's what happened. So I get there, we're traveling, I'm enjoying myself, but the guy who ran the school, he was actually a mainland Chinese guy who lived in Melbourne. And when we finally got over there and we started with this job, he said to me, "Oh, it's good to see you," and, yada, yada, yada. And I said, "Oh, yeah, cool. And tell me all about your school." And he starts telling me about his school, and automatically the bells started ringing, right? The red flags. It was like, "Oh yeah, this is our school. We have a school here on Canterbury Road in Box Hill." Hold on. My old high school was in Canterbury Road, Box Hill. And turned out that my school that had closed in the 90s was sold off to a bunch of Thai who were running this sort of commercial school for Asian kids, Thai kids mostly. And this guy had decided that he was going to tell everyone that he owned that school when he didn't. And so of all the schools that he could have possibly picked to lie about, because it turns out he didn't have anything, right? This was all it wasn't a scam. It was basically he was lying about what he had back in Australia in an attempt to start a program in China. And of course I was like, that's my old school and I've kept an eye on that and that's owned by the Thai. Oh, no, it's owned by us. And so I started Googling it and looking, and it's not named what he's saying it's named and all this. And I was just like, oh, here we go. And by this stage, I'm already in China. Right, here we are. We've landed, and I'm talking to him about so what's the curriculum? Could you show me the curriculum? Don't need curriculum. This is your job. You do curriculum. And I was just like, I don't know, I'm going to get in trouble for doing his accent. That's how he spoke. And I was like, so what do you expect me to do? You do the curriculum. And I'm like, I do the curriculum for a P to 6 English language program in a Chinese government school. I'm starting on Monday and you want me to do the curriculum. And it was like we had landed in shit, basically. And here I was. And I was like, oh, God. And I'm like, well, dude, if you want me to write the curriculum, you will pay me to write the curriculum. Yes, I'll teach. But I'm not going to build you an entire curriculum for an entire program for nothing. And then it started to get a little bit nasty, and he thought he was just going to hire a teacher, put the teacher in, and the teacher was going to make him shitloads of money. And it was like, no. So started sniffing around a little bit with the principal of the Chinese government school. It was just so sus and so dodgy. And so I just basically said, well, that's it. I'm out of here. This is after a couple of weeks. And the principal said, don't go. Why don't you and I go into business together? Because this guy obviously doesn't know and we need this program. So I said, okay. So she said, how much do you want? And I gave her a figure. Now, the thing was, Brian, what I should have done was I should have said, yeah, I'll take it all. And then given any money back to them as I wanted to go. Instead, what I did was I said, in my mind, this is a poor country school. I'm not going to take all this money. And I basically said to her, this is the figure that I want. And I lowballed myself intentionally because the Chinese government school needed the money more than I did, right? Later on, of course, this is making shitloads of money. It turns out she's telling the school that I'm taking all the money, and meanwhile, she starts pocketing the bulk of the money that this program is making. All of a sudden, she starts driving a BMW. She's buying all these properties. There's all this stuff. That's how much money this was making, right? Because this is a Chinese government school of thousands of kids, and they're all doing this after-school program and paying X amount of money. And the big lesson for me at that point was, Troy, because I thought I was giving to the school, giving to the poor, right, which is me, still Christian, right? What I was actually doing was I was giving to this corrupt principal who was putting all the money in her pocket.
So how long were you there in partnership?
4 years.
4 years. Okay, so it's a fair stint, and you
And
had
it
no
took me a
idea.
long time to work out what was going on. I didn't work all this out in the first year, of course.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. So you had no idea, things were cruising along. You're thinking you're doing good, and you're helping them out, and meanwhile, your partner is skimming everything.
Yeah, more than skimming, taking the bulk. And I guess I should have known whenever I'd go in to get paid, she'd actually put her fingers to her lips and take me into the back room and give me the money. And she must have just thought, you dumb lawai, like she just must have thought I was, and I was, because I'd basically given her and no wonder she wanted me to keep it quiet on how much I was earning and stuff, because if people in the school community had found out that I was only getting X amount of money, which was less than half of what she was actually making, and we were still doing okay, right? But so anyway, so that was all going on. At the same time, though, my wife fell pregnant. We had our first son. So this is around 2004, 2005. And I'm noticing that we are now basically nearly 30 minutes into this session, and I haven't got to the fact that I'm losing my faith. But here I am. I'm at a point now where the internet is much more available than it had been when I'd first left when I'd first left church at the end of 99, beginning of 2000. And I was I'd found this website called Walk Away from Fundamentalism. And it was a bulletin board. And I think I'd mentioned that I'd found that in Queensland before I left, but I was still following it when I got into China. And I also found infidels.org, which was the website that I mentioned in our last episode, which was a whole heap of atheist articles about why religion is bullshit. And then I also found a lot of those key players on that website. So there were people like Dr. Robert Price. There was whispers of some guy named Bart Ehrman who was writing books. And the bulletin board, Walk Away from Fundamentalism, was made up of obviously a lot of people who had walked away from church. But the thing about it was I was still really trying to hold on to faith, right? Even though I wanted nothing to do with faith. It was kind of weird, the dichotomy of afraid of hell, but at the same time wanted nothing to do with church and nothing to do with the religion. So I wouldn't say out loud that I didn't believe. I wouldn't say internally to myself that I didn't believe. Oh, yeah, I still believe, because I'm hedging my bets, right, in case, I'm going to go to hell or whatever. But I would read these websites and these people were becoming Wiccans, and some people were even saying that they were now Satanists, and other people were complete atheists. And I didn't want any of that. I didn't want to become a Satanist. I didn't want to become a Wiccan. And not saying those two are the same. I'm just saying this was the sort of stuff that was there. I didn't want to become a hardcore atheist. And then I'd also read occasionally some of these more liberal Christians who were, on there as well, and thinking, I don't want that either. And I'd read the Marcus Borg books, which had, sort of suggested that you could still have a faith after leaving fundamentalism. And I didn't want any of it, Brian. I didn't want to be an atheist. I didn't want to be because I was afraid. I didn't want to be a Wiccan, because that's just, bullshit in my mind at that point anyway. I didn't want to be a Satanist because, well, you'll go to hell. Well, yeah, I didn't want to be any of these things, and I certainly didn't want to be a liberal Christian. Oh God, it's just like like you say, that it's just saving the brand. Didn't want a bar of it. But I think the thing that was most appealing to me was the idea of atheism, was that this is all bullshit. This had hurt me. This had damaged me. I had seen the flaws in this religion, and this is all just bullshit. And so I think I wanted to reject it all. And I wanted to be certain. And that's the thing that I really want to stress here, that I would not have been in any way comfortable with uncertainty, with grey. I was out of fundamentalism, but still very much mentally a fundamentalist.
Were you identifying as a Christian still? Because you're saying, you didn't want to be a liberal, you didn't want to be that, but you also didn't want to be another thing. If someone walked up to you and asked you, are you a Christian, would you have said yes still?
It would depend on whether the cock was about to crow, right? 3 times. Yeah, I would have said, within myself, I would have said, yes, I still believe. Church sucks. The whole thing was, I wanted nothing to do with it, but yeah, deep down, I still believe. Right? So, yeah, I think at that stage I would have said that for sure.
Okay. But you were sort of kicking the tires on atheism and going, maybe this will work for me.
Yeah, I was. And what I was doing, though, was I started this sort of intellectual journey into, is this religion true? Which I had never done. I'd never read Who Rolled the Stone and Mere Christianity. I'd never read all this shit, right? I just believed that I never felt I needed to. I believed Christianity. I didn't need all this convincing. I had read some of the biblical contradiction books and things like that, but I'd heard the arguments at Bible college and all that, but I'd never really sat down and go, okay, I'm going to investigate the empty tomb and all these, kind of Josh McDowell, all that kind of stuff. You related to him, by the way, Brian McDowell?
Uncle Josh? No.
No. Yeah, great name, though. Josh McDowell. You should have had a boy and named him Josh. Imagine if you'd done that.
I could have, but I didn't. I could have, but no, I didn't.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, ADHD, moving on. So I wanted it to not be true, but I wasn't convinced that it wasn't true, so I decided to start to investigate. So as I said, I started looking at these websites. I started reading a lot of articles. I don't know if Richard Dawkins had actually started to surface by that stage. He might have. It's sort of a blur, right? That whole sort of 2004 to 2009, that whole sort of thing's a blur. But I know it was by 2004, 2005 that I basically came to the end of my faith. And I know that because it was around the time that my son was born. But what happened was I'd been reading all this stuff. I had been immersing myself. I think by that stage I'd found Bart Ehrman's book, Misquoting Jesus. By the way, folks, if you have not read Bart's books, going right back to the beginning, Misquoting Jesus and Jesus Interrupted and these other books, can I just say you must? You must get in and read those books, because what he basically does is he shows you the problems with the Bible, just the Bible, right? And Bart, he never wants to destroy anyone's faith, wink, wink, but really have a look at those books. They're amazing. And so I was reading those, and I like Bart's stuff because it basically speaks the language of Christianity, whereas Dawkins and these others, it's just a full frontal attack on the cult mentality, and you just don't let him in, right? So I was reading all this stuff, and the cognitive dissonance was intense. And Brian, you've heard me talk before about that tooth decay, that basically from inside out, the faith was dead.
Yeah, 100%. We have spoken about that. And I was going to actually refer to that before. So I'm glad you brought it up. So I was going to say what was left of your tooth at this stage. So there you go. We're on the same page.
And it's interesting because I've never really thought about it. You talked about the spiritual Jenga, the theological Jenga, where you're pulling the blocks out, right? But the thing about me was I just kept holding it up, right? Like I'm pulling the blocks out and the thing should have fallen away, fallen away. Oh, there you go, Freud. The thing should have fallen down a long time ago, but I was holding it up. And I was going, no, it hasn't fallen down. And basically my spiritual Jenga thing had all these sticks from the outside that I'd put in there just holding it up, even though I'm pulling out all these pieces. And I was so afraid of hell. That's what it was. I was so afraid of losing my salvation, which is interesting because I was thinking about when I connected with Christianity, I was not so much afraid of hell. There was a little bit because I'd seen The Omen and The Exorcist and stuff like that. I was more afraid of the devil than I was of hell. But I more just wanted to connect with the divine, connect with something bigger than myself. But that wasn't what held me in when I was looking at leaving. It was fear of hell, fear of the devil, fear of suffering, torture, eternal. And so I wrote an email to Dr. Robert Price. And Dr. Price had been a member of the Jesus Seminar in the 90s. The Jesus Seminar is basically where they all tried to determine what did the historical Jesus actually say. And so they all these different Jesus scholars, they had 3 different color chips that they could throw in. Did Jesus say it was one color? Did he probably say it was another color and he definitely didn't say it or whatever, or possibly say it? Anyway, and he'd been a part of that. So he already had my attention. So I wrote to him and I said, I don't know what to do. Here's my challenge. I don't believe all this stuff. All right, I don't believe the Bible. I don't believe, Jesus, Son of God. I don't believe that he'd, historically done this and that, da. But I'm afraid to let it go. And he came back with some absolute wisdom. And he said this to me in an email. He said, and it was great that he even wrote back to me, right? Nice guy. And he said to me, if God exists, and I'm not saying he does, but if God exists, you ain't fooling him. And I was like, and he's like, he knows you don't believe anymore. And then he said to me, do you remember the 4 spiritual laws, which is it was a tract, and it was all a salvation one. I think it was made by InterVarsity Press. See, that's how much I know this shit. And it basically says at the end of it, there's like your faith is like a train, or your life is like a train, and you have faith, fact, and feeling. And it said we have to put the train in the right order. It's driven by faith, then followed by fact, and lastly followed by feeling. And Bob Price said to me in this email, because friends call him Bob, said to me, take that advice. He said, but this time put the fact at the front, not the feeling. He said, you're being dictated to by your feelings, which is your fear of hell. He said, put that at the back and let it be led by the facts. And these are the facts you have, which means that you have no faith. Boom, 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 yada, yada, yada. Dominoes fell. And I just went, mind blown. That's exactly right. He's 100% right. Now, does that mean that I never was afraid of hell again? No. It continued on. But it was enough in that moment for me to go, okay. And I said this in the last episode, right? I don't believe Jesus is Lord. I don't believe that God raised him from the dead. What is it? If you confess with him, I said, I confess with my mouth that Jesus isn't Lord, that God didn't raise him from the dead. And as I said before, and he's dead in a ditch in Palestine.
So deconversion, like
That was it.
you unwound it.
Yep. And it was as much as I had that moment of conversion in the basement of my high school in 1983, 1984, I had a moment of deconversion in China in this apartment that I was renting where I actually said it out loud, and that was it. And it's interesting because so many other people talk about it being a process, and it was totally a process for me, Brian, but it was like this tooth decay, But it wasn't until the very end that I just sort of pulled out the dead tooth and went, oh, that's been dead for a really long time. And it had. I would say that my faith started to fall apart with the end of my marriage and the inconsistencies of I've been obedient, I've followed God, I've done all these things. Why isn't this working? That's where it started. And of course, all the great big AOG stuff and everything, over a period of time. But I did need to do the intellectual work, which is what I ended up doing for those years in China at first, where I actually dug in. So I got to China in about 2004 and I deconverted in, I would say it would have been 2005, not long after my son was born. And that was it. I was no longer a Christian and I could stop worrying.
Well, did you? Did you stop worrying about hell? No.
Oh, no. No, what I mean is I could stop worrying in the sense, it was funny, when that came out of my mouth, it was like, well, that didn't happen, did it? No, what I mean by stop worrying, I could stop with the contradiction of, oh, I'm a Christian, and then just not doing anything that Christians do and doing everything that Christians aren't supposed to do. You know, I was divorced, I was remarried, I was drinking a lot. And that's the other thing I think I need to say, that this was very, very painful and very, very traumatic, and it was. And I was drinking like a fish, like a fish.
Like a fish. Did it come with a set of feelings, and what were they? Because I know that we've both spoken about our conversion stories, and mine came with a set of feelings. It was like, wow, I was sort of, I felt something I'd never felt. Felt like I was entering a world which was full of mystery and wonder and blah, blah, blah. Your deconversion, did that come with its own set of feelings, and what did that look and sound and feel like to you?
I don't know, man. I think because I'd been at uni for a couple of years, and by this stage I had taken my uni with me over to China, and I was doing it by distance, right? So I was at UQ doing a journalism master's, and I was in a very academic world. I was existing in this world even though I was a million miles away from it physically. So I was reading a lot of academic texts, and infidels.org draws on a lot of philosophy and academia as well, a lot of the articles and everything. And so I felt like I was sort of in a much more cerebral place than as a Pentecostal, which was a very emotional place. But I was still suffering on the inside, the anxiety that I was suffering from this whole breakdown of faith, this breakdown of your worldview. I've heard it said that it's like a divorce. It's like the death of a loved one. This is the kind of trauma that people have when they lose their faith. And to actually come to this point of denial to acceptance, I think there was a lightening. It was like, at least I have less of that internal dilemma, internal contention. It's like, okay, I no longer believe in this. And then I was reading the atheism stuff, not just about Christianity, but also about the very existence of God and a God. And I accepted that too. And I swallowed that, warts and all, though. I don't think I really filtered it to the point of saying, okay, what do I actually believe around atheism? I think it was like, oh yeah, I'm convinced. In the same way I became a Christian, I became an atheist. Okay, I'm convinced of this now. I'm this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does make sense, yeah. And I guess I asked because I didn't have that clear-cut deconversion. Like, for me, we've spoken about this, it had happened over a long time. I got divorced and went, cool, it's time to walk away. I've got no reason to hang on to this anymore. So I think for me, the feelings were gradual, and they definitely happened, and it left me, I left it. And I don't think I could identify what it was because it was such a long, drawn-out process. But yours was a definitive point in time where you literally deconverted. I don't think too many people do that.
Yeah, well, that's what I was saying before. It was both. It wasn't either or. I deconverted, but I had played that Jenga in the lead up. But maybe that speaks to me about my need for control. Like, I controlled this, and I came to a point where I said, okay, now I am this, and now I'm that, or I'm gonna. I don't know, man. But for me, it's so typically me that it's a big fucking drama. You know what I mean? And it plays out, and there's this, dun dun dun. Do you remember when I told you when I left my marriage and I had sex with someone else for the first time? You could almost hear the music playing, and there's me. Dun dun dun. It was the same with the breakdown of my faith. This is me. I'm a diva, and it played out like some fucking opera, as if I'm the center of the universe, which, let's face it, from my perspective, I am.
It's interesting. Like, yes, you are. I will acknowledge that. And we all are for all ourselves. I wonder sometimes, like, I toy with the idea, I wonder what my life would look like if I was still professing to be a Christian or holding on to some semblance of faith. And I can't even go there because not for a fear or anything. I just can't imagine what my life would look like still pretending to believe something that I just fundamentally did not believe was true. And there's so many people, and maybe there's some people listening right now that are in that space. Fucking give it up. Give up the ruse, what I say. But there's so many people I know that are still in it and do not act in any way that they profess you should act as a Christian. They're fucking racist, they're bigots, they're hateful, they're bitter. Oh, yeah, but they're still Christians. And fucking let it go, people. Anyway, down off the soapbox.
No, fair enough. I think there's a lot of truth to that. And that's why I think, I took my dog for a walk this morning and was thinking about this episode, and I was thinking, I can understand these people because they're afraid, or because there's nothing pushing them to step out of it all. So I held on to it for the longest time. I mean, I left church in 99. I didn't deconvert until, 2004, 2005. And so I had this cognitive dissonance, and both kind of, trauma's not the word, conflict that I was carrying around for 4 or 5 years until I eventually went, okay, bang. Now, I would love to say that was it and I was free and life went, no. But it did free me a lot to be able to just live. Okay, I'm going to pursue my, continue to work on my master's, and I'm going to love my wife and have these, have kids and do all this. And at least I wasn't being bombarded by guilt, thinking that I wasn't being a good enough Christian and all that. But the way that Christians get in and they read all the apologetics to bolster their faith. I was reading all the anti-apologetics or the atheist stuff to bolster my atheism because I was still afraid. I hadn't dealt with all that fear of hell stuff. And Brian, you and I have released episodes about the fear of hell, and we've released episodes about our own experience and coming to the end of the fear of hell and everything. You know that this has been 20 years later that I feel like I've really resolved this. Like, ask me, are you still afraid of hell, Troy?
Are you still afraid of hell, Troy?
No, I'm not. I don't believe it exists. And also I don't have the feelings, to think about Robert Price's train. Those feelings, they're not even attached to the train when it comes to hell. It's gone. But no amount of intellectual digging was enough. I had to do the emotional dealing with, which for me was therapy and EMDR and all that kind of thing. But yeah, no, I'm not afraid of hell anymore because I don't believe it exists.
At that point where, you definitely let go of your faith, 20 years ago now, would it be fair to say with your intellectual diggings into atheism and that you replaced your fear with an anger, like an unrighteous anger, and maybe that helped you mask some of that fear because you were trying to convince yourself? I mean, it's just an observation. It may not be true.
Yeah, no, I think there's some merit to that. I think that's why I was so aggressive, because it's like, you fuck off with your hell bullshit. And when people would come to me with, some sort of Christianity, I'd just like, oh, okay, let's set fire to that. And I would attack. Yeah. Because, attack is the best form of defense, people say, right? So, yeah, I think that was totally true. But, then as I mentioned in the last episode when we talked about this, Facebook came along and I was just dropping fart bombs in people's Facebook pages about religion. And, that's who I became. I became the I became the evangelist for atheism. But the point I'm trying to make there about all that is there was a certainty that didn't actually exist. I wanted a certainty, but you can't have certainty about this stuff, right? You can I can be pretty certain that there is no God and all that kind of stuff, but you can't be totally certain. But when we were in church, we were convinced that we could be totally certain. So you'd taken the boy out of fundamentalism, but you hadn't taken fundamentalism out of the boy. And so I was clamoring for certainty, and I was craving it, and I missed it, and I needed it because I was a certainty addict. That's what fundamentalism had done for me. And I had no idea that that was actually an issue. I was just being buffeted by this rather than taking control of this.
I think all that's completely normal. And I even see this all around me and, with some people quite close to me that they really latch onto the conspiracy theories about things because that gives them certainty, because they can't sit with an uncertainty because it feels unsafe, that they can't deal with the complexities of the world around them, that there just aren't simple answers to the world around us. That's the reality. And I think you've got to be comfortable in uncomfortable spaces around thinking like that. And that's why I do think that conspiracy theories are something that are very attractive to certain people because they have to have explanations. Even if it's not a true explanation for someone who sits on the outside of it, it is for them and it gives them comfort. And I think it's a similar sort of thing that potentially you went through.
Yeah, well, I think it's a kind of control. It's a kind of order that even if it's a negative, at least there is a narrative and there is something that we can understand. And yeah, I think there's definitely more than some truth to that, Brian. I think you're spot on.
There's the they. We other it. Someone else must be in control of this, and they're trying to derail me. But how was your sense of safety when you were exploring atheism? Because I think what you said before was really good in that when you compare what Bart Ehrman are doing and really rampant atheists, they're trying to do the same thing, but they've got different methodologies. And I think Bart Ehrman's is a very good methodology because it's using your own logic to make you think about the things that you believe and to, I guess, deconstruct those and have a good look at them. Whereas atheists, like rampant atheists, they just turn me off because I'm just like, you are just as fundamentalist as anyone else, and your fucking anger just puts me off. I don't want to listen to you. I don't want to engage, and it doesn't work for me. I know it works for a lot of people, and they really engage with that anger because it does something to displace the other things that they're uncomfortable with and gives them a certainty around it. But how was your sense of safety? Did you feel like, because, we need safety in our lives, we need to be anchored to something. Did you feel like atheism gave you that when you started to explore it?
I think there was a sense of belonging, like I was a part of this community now, and there was that label, atheist. I was a Christian, now I'm an atheist. So I don't know about safety because I was still underneath it all quite afraid of hell. And, what if I've got this wrong? So I don't know about safety, but there was, online communities and there was an identity, but also it wasn't all bad. Like, I'm sitting here painting this as if, because I wanted certainty and because I was angry and all that. But there was still some really good stuff that was happening in the midst of all that, which was the academic intellectual understanding of the faith. And like I said, I investigated the claims of the faith, right? The Bible, the deity of Christ, even back to some of the Jewish stories, like was there really a flood? What about evolution? What about science? All those kinds of things. And it all just came up lacking. And it was again and again and again and again. Those Jenga blocks, the Jenga blocks that were left were just pulled out. And it was like, there is no reality to this faith. Now, speaking for now, not for then, does that mean that there's no value in it for some people? No, of course there is, right? I remember a friend of mine. Do you remember Jonas? Do you remember my friend Jonas?
I do, one of the Jonas brothers. Yep.
No, he wasn't one of the Jonas brothers. He was one of the James brothers. Jonas James was his name. And great name. And he was a guitarist, Jonas James. Yeah, Jonas James could be a band. But anyway, he had come in after raving. He had come into church with me. I brought him in, right? The evangelist brought him in. And he had left. And he reached out to me when I was in China. He'd left Australia, not the church. And he reached out to me. He'd moved to America. He got himself a job in a church. He'd done his master's at some theological seminary somewhere and was, doing everything that I would have gone on to have done at some point in my life. And it was really interesting because he reached out to me I think he call me? It's early days of Skype, but he basically wanted to know about antidepressants, and he wanted to know about psychologically supportive medications and stuff. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And I started talking to him about that. And then he started talking to me about maybe the religion's not true. And I was like, dude. And so, we went to town and had this big chat. It was fantastic. And then years later, he completely went off the wagon and back to drugs and just a mess. And I remember just sitting there watching that. This is even when I was in China going, he should have stayed. He shouldn't have left. Because without those guardrails, mental health, addiction, he was a mess. And even then, Brian, I thought, this is actually good for some people. I know that may sound full on to say, but...
No, I completely agree. And it's sort of the opposite of what Brian McLaren spoke about when we had him on. He spoke about some people cannot stay and should not stay because of the experience they've had as Christians, and they should leave. Conversely, I completely agree that some people find a framework of belonging and, let's go back to what we've spoken about a lot, community and belonging and a sense of self, and that sense of self that people haven't had before. And hey, it's not entirely healthy because your sense of self is absorbed in something that's not true, and absorbed into what is, I think, the identity of the church community that you might be part of, or the expression of faith. But for some people, they've never had anything else, and they may not be with us on this earth if they did not have that. So it's sort of the best that some people can get, and it's going to help them. And I wish that some people could find that outside of a church, and that would be amazing.
Oh, and some people do. They do find it in other communities, for sure.
Totally they do. But I think what we are seeing a lot more with, we've seen a breakdown of community and, a heightened individualism. So it's harder and harder for people to find those sort of places to belong. So I do think that when you've got contemporary expressions like Pentecostalism and evangelical churches that, can be exciting, they can be fun, and they can be a place where people can engage. It's a plug and play. You've got all of these different places. You can go to home group, youth group, whatever. I do think that is very attractive, and it's an easy thing for people to be able to adapt to.
But the problem is, and I know you know this, right? Preaching to the choir, but the problem is, when it finishes its usefulness, they don't let you leave.
No.
They will destroy you as you try to leave. They will take everything back and, pull out the rug from under you as you try to leave. And that's the problem here, isn't it? Imagine if they did that and then just released you back into the wild after they'd rebuilt you and helped you find your feet and everything. And God bless, see you later, have a great life. Wouldn't that be awesome if that's what they did? But they don't, because they're fucking cults.
Oh, absolutely. And I've had examples recently where I have been demonized by particular people that are still in church, and they create this identity about me and how I must be now that I've left church, and how I'm quite
it's
evil.
Probably all true. It's probably all true.
Yeah. And that I've got ulterior motives, and my motives. And yeah, I do.
Sorry. I know this is probably undermining everything you try to say, but it's true, because you're a piece of shit.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. I must be, because I don't believe in Jesus. But it's really interesting. And so I've had my motives questioned on particular things that are happening at the moment within my broader family life, and some things that have been going on. My mum has recently moved into aged care, and we've had to sell her house, and I'm her power of attorney along with another one of my sisters, and everything, like, we're just following her wishes, her orders, and only sharing information that she wants. And obviously I can't be trusted because, I'm no longer...
Because you're not a Christian anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. And more than half of my siblings are fundamentalist Christians. So it's quite interesting. But there's, one in particular that is just rampant on the attack. And it's yeah, God, they're a control freak too. So I think that doesn't make it easy, but it's really interesting. And I know what's behind it is definitely because I'm a Christian, I can't be trusted. And it's really interesting because this person is a Christian and most certainly cannot be trusted. So it's yeah, it's a fun time.
Yeah. Yeah. I reckon I know who that is too. Yeah, that's it. And look, this actually opens up to another episode that we should do about friends and family after having left church, right? I think because that's definitely a moving forward episode, and I think we should definitely talk about that. But when I looked back at Jonas, he should have stayed. And I thought to myself, I'm not responsible for him leaving. He wanted to leave and he came to me and asked for permission, in essence, and I gave it to him, albeit philosophically and academically. And he went off and fell off the edge. And that was really sad. And that was the first indication to me that these places, for some at least, do serve a purpose. And also for me, when I came out of the rave scene and, the Revival Centre and all the mess the AOG was there to pick up the pieces. But what I didn't realise is they were slowly and quietly shackling me to themselves in the process. But still, it was for a period of time where I needed to be. It was kind of like some sort of rehab program to get my life back on the rails, But talking about these guardrails, that's what Jonas needed, and Jonas continued to need that, but I only needed it for a period of time. And then when I was ready to go, as I said, they didn't let me go, and that's where I was angry. So yeah, man, we're moving sort of forward. By about 2009, I was sending people books, Bart Ehrman books. I was, mailing them to people from China and stuff, just, you got to read this. And, I was evangelizing people around all that. But then I got a bit of a reputation in our sort of circles, our ex circles, that when you're fallen off the wagon in terms of your religion, you can reach out to Troy. And so a lot of people did. And that was cool. And I told you that I basically blogged, which on the 100th episode, I actually put the link into my blog at the time and just my findings. And I remember the one that really stood out to me was just the story of Paul. Paul's conversion was one in Acts and another one in, I don't know, Corinthians or wherever it is. I don't remember anymore. But his conversion stories contradict. They cannot both be true. And for me, I'd already decided that the Bible wasn't literally true. But at this point, I was like, actually, I don't think it's true at all. And, and as you know, I'd given up my faith and Jesus was dead in a ditch in Palestine. Ta-da! And that's how I lost my faith, Brian. That's how I lost my faith.
And that is good. It's sort of punctuates that point in your life. But I do think that there's a lot in between then and now that we will continue to explore for both of us. I think once both of us walked away, lots of things that have happened, and obviously even the things that have led us to start a podcast was that we needed to unpack it, we needed to contextualize it, and I think there's plenty more in there. Quite often when you say to me, "Oh, you should do an episode about your story," I don't know where to start. I don't even know some of the things I want to speak about, but I'll do another one soon as well. I'll think about what it could be, but I do like your idea about some of those people since we've left and some of those interactions, because I don't have them as often as I once would have, say, the last 6-7 years. I haven't seen as many of those people. I still engage with them online, and there's some people I engage with that have left and I engage with them more frequently, but I don't engage as much. But those first few years after I left, dear God, there was quite a few people it was really interesting, their way that they would frame me. And I don't know, maybe it was their way of dealing with how someone could walk away. You couldn't just walk away because you didn't believe anymore. Something must have happened, or you are this and that. It's the only way they deal with it, because it's the only way
it's like this in any cult, Brian. There is no legitimate way to leave the group.
Yeah.
From their mentality. There is no legitimate way. It must be illegitimate. It must be something about you. You can't just leave. And that's what I said a moment ago with, with myself, right? I should have basically come to a point where they said, hey, we can't do any more for you. Off you go.
Yeah.
But they don't do that, do they?
Well, no, and they need to build congregations. They have a growth mentality, so of course they can't just let you go. But here we are. That is your story, and we will continue that story about our observations of some of those people and interactions. So we'll line that up, and you'll hear that in the next few months. But we have got a couple more episodes coming out soon that are not about progressive religions.
No. So you can listen.
You can listen. And we have got, it was interesting, Lucy, who used to do our socials, she sent us an article, a Substack actually, of a therapist who was talking about how we can often leave fundamentalism, but fundamentalism doesn't leave us. And I know that we've spoken about that before in the way that people become very fundamentalist about many, many things in their lives. So we're going to get her on, I think, later in the year, in about 3 months' time. And she's going to talk to that as well, because I think that some really good reflective time around that is needed for everyone, including ourselves, because we can get so dogged about particular things.
Yeah. And also, as we said a moment ago, I'd really love to do an episode about people, friends and family that are still in church. I think that's long overdue. We've needed to do that for a while. Whether it's a guest episode or whether it's just us, we definitely need to address that one.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. It's really interesting. Of my siblings who are still in church, there's 4 of them. So half are in, because there is 8 of us. And of those, they're same but different. It's really interesting, and they're all I would say fundamentalists, but have different expressions of that fundamentalism. So yeah, I'd like to speak a little bit to my observations of that, and they are only my observations and my interactions with them. But yeah, interesting times.
So in the 80s, when that American TV show 8 is Enough, when that was on, did your parents see that as a sign from God?
I think they did. No, well, they weren't Christians in the 80s. But when that was on, that show, it was really interesting. The ages of those children were the same ages as our family when it was airing.
Gaps. Yeah, okay.
The gaps. So because the 8th child was my age when
Adam Rich was his name. That was the actor's name.
That's right.
He went on to be one of the voices of the characters in the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon in the 80s as well. And do you remember that the father was Dick Van Patten, not to be confused with Dick Van Dyke?
Yes, I do remember Dick Van Patten. So which sounds dirty. What are you doing?
Sounds like a tattoo. Oh, could you give me a Dick Van Patten? It's going to hurt.
Yeah. I'm just wincing right now. Anyway, people, thank you for listening. I think it's been a good conversation. Thank you for sharing, Troy, and taking us back to that time 20 years ago when you did.
Yeah, you're welcome. No trauma, though, because, it was a freedom time. Yeah, baby.
Yeah, well, the freedom did take a while to completely get there. And, are we truly free? I'll leave people with that to ponder. If you'd like to connect with the I Was a Teenage Fundamentalist podcast, then please see the links in our link tree in the show notes. We invite you to join our listener community on Facebook, and we're also on Instagram, X, and Reddit. Check out our merch on Redbubble. We've got t-shirts, hoodies, mugs, and all kinds of great ex-evangelical stuff that you can wear proudly. All proceeds go to building and promoting the podcast. We want to give a huge shout out to our Patreon supporters. Subscribers get a range of benefits, including free merch, early access to episodes, access to our exclusive subscribers group, and monthly bonus content. Again, all proceeds of this go to the running and promotion costs of the podcast. A special thanks to Ava, who manages our social strategy, and also to Kerry and Bree, who manage our Facebook listener group, and also to Bree, who puts out our monthly newsletter on Substack. All of our episodes are transcribed by Leanne to increase accessibility. The show is produced and hosted by Brian McDowell and Troy Waller. The sound engineering for this episode was done by Clifford. I Was a Teenage Fundamentalist is available wherever you find your podcasts. Again, you can find all our links in our link tree in the show notes, or why don't you pop across to our website at www.iwas